Well, hello and thanks for joining me for some landscape photography. And today I'm pretty much at home. Well, now, as you can imagine, my options around locations are pretty limited at the moment. If I look over in that direction, I can see the peaks of Areri that have been snowbound for the last couple of months, and I can't even think about visiting them. But let me put that into some kind of perspective, because right now, as I'm stood here, there are people struggling to stay alive. There are people that are grieving lost loved ones. There are people that are working on the front line of this pandemic, and every day for them is a nightmare from hell. And there are people who live in difficult urban locations. And yet here I am with some fabulous locations right on my doorstep. So I'm very, very grateful that I can live somewhere like this. And today I'm going to be taking some images of this gem of a brook. And this lovely little brook is called Afon Gunner, and it runs down into Llyn Coron, which is the beautiful lake that sits in front of my house, that you've probably seen far too many times in videos on my channel. And there are three good reasons why I've decided to come and shoot today. And the first one, of course, is we're in mid-January, it's mid-afternoon, and we've got lovely winter sidelight, about 2 or 3 hours before sunset. And as long as we don't get too many clouds coming over, my subject should be nicely illuminated. And my subjects, second reason I've chosen today, plenty of water in the stream, lots of rainfall runoff, and the cascades further up that I want to shoot should hopefully be reasonably dramatic. And the third reason, of course, is at this time of year, there's no foliage overhanging the beat that I'm going to be shooting, because that does obscure it pretty much right through summer and autumn. So let's take a short stroll along this little brook and see what we can find. Now, this sort of location really does give you the opportunity to practice your craft. But when you can't get out to the honeypot locations, you can still have some fun with landscape photography. You can try all sorts of things in a location like this: focus stacking, exposure blending, and you can also, of course, work on your compositions. This particular first shot that I've come up with, I'm taking advantage of the way the stream has eaten into the bank and created a beautiful S-curve, which is accentuated by this line of white water running diagonally across the stream. What I've also got is the branch of this really nice ash tree lying low above it. Perfect at this time of year, as I mentioned earlier, because we've got no foliage obscuring the network of branches and twigs. I've got the very bottom of my image framed with the corner of this boulder and the grass as it swings round through the bottom corner of the image. I'm shooting at about 13 millimeters. I couldn't really get back any further, as you can see. I've had to kind of embrace myself with this tree. But I will be cropping the top out a little bit, so I do expect it to be quite landscape. But what it's allowed me to do is to make sure I don't cut off the bank on the right-hand side of the image, and on the left-hand side to make sure that I get all this nice white water. I'm focus stacking this with the first focus point right on the corner of this rock, which is only about 2 feet in front of the camera. Then a focus point at midstream and one in the far background, just to make sure. Now I'm shooting at f8, and I've also put a 3-stop neutral density filter on because I wanted to get my shutter speed up to about half a second. And it is actually quite light here today, so I needed that assistance from the filter to get the shutter speed that I wanted. I tried a few test shots with a faster shutter speed, starting around about a 10th or a 20th of a second, and I found that they froze the water too much. If I put a 6-stop filter on, then my shutter speed is about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds, and that smudges it all out too much. So the magic of digital photography is you can see exactly what you're going to get and dial it down until you get it just right. I'm really happy with the effect of the water at about half a second shutter speed. The color in the water is also coming through, but I've dialed it down using circular polarizer. Very important with this sort of photography when you're shooting anything with water, because you really do want to control the glare. Otherwise, on a day like this with the sun coming in at right angles, you just end up with a great big sheet of light, and you don't want that. You want to create the light and dark and all these little, where the water sweeps down through and it's really deep and powerful. You want that to be dark, and then as it bubbles up and all that foam is created, that's when you have these really nice white streaks emulating that movement. Yeah, I'm really happy with that, so let's head on up the beat and see what else we can find. That's something that I've noticed, particularly when I'm out working with tuition clients. Landscape photographers have a tendency to pitch up at a location, identify their subject, and then the camera's straight on the tripod. They don't really work the composition. By parking your camera on the tripod, you're missing out on all sorts of potential angles and alternatives. And it's something that I very rarely do. So I've just spent the last 4 or 5 minutes working on roughly where I'm going to need the tripod. I think I've got it dialed in. What I'm liking about this particular composition with the cascade just here is that it's running out under this mass of dead branches. And what I want to do is to try and get a shot where the water is piling through it in all sorts of little rivulets, but the branches are still and stark in the image. So it's probably going to be quite a tight crop, and also I might need a faster shutter speed because there is a bit of breeze. Some of these branches are moving slightly. So let's see what I can do with this one. But I've had to get right down into the mud for this one. I wanted to get low because some of the drama is kind of underneath this tangle of branches, and if I was shooting it from too high, I'm losing out on part of the composition. I'm in relatively tight, and there's a branch that curls around from the right-hand side, which I've got framing the right-hand side of it, and the end of the branch then comes down to the bottom third intersection. The top third is all the tangled branches, and I will probably crop slightly off the top. But what I'm also going to do is darken it down quite a lot. It's catching a lot of sunlight, which for the branches in the middle of the composition, that's perfect, because it shows you that tangle. But I don't want the eye to kind of drift out of the top of the image. So that top line is probably going to be significantly darkened down. I'm shooting at 38 millimeters, so I'm hopeful that the other aspects of the image won't need cropping at all. I've still got my 3-stop ND filter on, but I can only get about a 1/10 of a second now with the sun's come out and it's quite bright and it's shining right down into this water. But that said, I'm quite happy with that. It works nicely, and if I went any longer, the water is moving this branch in the mid-ground quite a lot, and I think I'm just about getting away with that still being sharp. with this shutter speed. If I'm not, I'm prepared to tolerate it because it's actually being moved by the water. If it's slightly soft, that kind of tells the story of what's going on here. So I'll live with that. Now, something that I've realised today is the extent to which I've neglected this lovely little Avon in the past. I have brought you down here once before, which was during the last lockdown, and I suppose that illustrates my point. I only come down here when I'm forced to, and yet it has so much to offer. Obviously, aside from the opportunity to practice, ready for getting back into the mountains with a serious compositions to attract my attention. But I'm really enjoying myself this afternoon. It's quite challenging, but my goodness, what a pleasant way to spend a sunny winter's afternoon. These fields are usually rented out to a local farmer, and he has his livestock in here most of the time, which can make for difficult shooting conditions. But at this time of year, we usually just come down here with young Winnie, and we just come for a walk. So I'll probably have to find myself down here a little bit more often with a camera as the seasons change, and maybe I'll bring you along with me. Anyway, I've got one more composition in mind that I scoped out the other day when I was out with Mrs. G. So I'm going to head on up the beat and we'll have a go at that one next. Now, this image requires something slightly different, and it's something you won't have seen me use before. Let me explain. You may have watched my stuff going back quite a ways when I said I'm buying just one lens and that's all I want to carry. And it's done me very well over the last couple of years for about 95% of my photography. And that, of course, is my 12 to 100mm f4 Pro Olympus. But I found that I had a slight problem. And in the middle of last year, I bought a slightly longer lens because I found the 100mm now and then just wasn't quite long enough. What I'd also found is that at the wide end, 12mm wasn't quite long enough, because on a micro four thirds sensor, that means that my widest shot would only be a full frame equivalent of 24mm. So what I did was I hung out for the cheapest of cheap second-hand Lauer f2 7.5mm rectilinear, and that's critical. I don't like the fisheye effect, but this fabulous little Lauer lens does a really good job of correcting the fisheye effect. It creates some really quite nice sharp images. I've been very pleased with the experimentation that I've done. This is my first time showing you me using it, and of course I'll be sharing the results of it with you when I put some pictures up at the end of this video. So for this particular image, I wanted to get the entire sweep of the river as it comes out of this nicely stone-faced culvert that runs under the main railway line from Euston to Holyhead. It swings round through this great big cutout where it's taken the bank away and then down over a cascade. Now, with this particular shot, I don't have the drama of the earlier shots. So what I've done is I've put some extra filter on. And the great thing about this little Lauer, even though it's a very wide angle, it's not fisheye and it does have a filter thread. So I'm using my polarizer, but what I've also done here is I've put a 6-stop on. I found that the 3-stop wasn't getting me a long enough shutter speed, because in this instance what I want to do was to take these little ripples and create those lines that run right through and show the flow of the water. So there isn't a lot of white water in this particular composition, and that sort of compensates for it. And it's probably the only time where with flowing water like this I would use a shutter speed as long as 3 or 4 seconds. The cascade at the bottom of this pool drops away and you can't really see it. It's just there mid-ground of the image. What I've also got, because it's really wide, is the profile of these beautiful ash trees in the background on the bank on the far side, and then a little bit of sky with some not brilliant definition, but also not a flat slab of either blue or grey. So it may be that I do leave a bit of sky in this composition. Now, of course, I could have used my pro lens to do a pano of this particular composition, but that does get a little bit awkward when I'm trying to blend the water together, because the pano would be going vertically across the main body of my composition, and I want these streaks to connect their way right through. That wouldn't have worked quite as well as this nice little wide angle lens. It's a completely manual lens, so you've got an aperture in control, which I currently have set at f5.6. It's very sharp even at the wide open aperture, and I may well use that for a spot of astro when I'm camping up in the mountains this summer. And the focusing is completely manual, but of course on a micro four thirds sensor with that wide angle, my depth of field is absolutely insane. So I've just focused around about infinity, and I'm more than happy that I'll have front to back sharpness. Well, I've had a really enjoyable couple of hours down by the stream this afternoon, and I haven't been out with my camera for several weeks, so it'll be interesting to see how rusty I am. Looking forward to get back to the house and see what I've got. Now, last year when we were in lockdown, I did make one or two videos as I was out and about doing my walks in this locality, and I think there's probably scope to make one or two more this time round. I don't think it'll be particularly regular, but with the conditions being different, it's a different time of year, I think that hopefully I won't bore you too much and might even entertain you, who knows. So keep an eye out for that, and if you haven't done it yet, why not subscribe now? But thank you ever so much for coming along with me today. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, I wonder if you might share a link to this video on your social media, just in case anybody else might enjoy it too. And join me next time. Cheers.